Chapter 2. Seduction of Shiva. The hermit finally marries the goddess and engages with the world. The world exists because sentient beings perceive it and respond to it. With each reaction, rasa is spent. Every time rasa is spent, it flows. As rasa flows, samsara blooms, and the wheel of existence turns. Shiva does not react. He does not spend rasa. He withholds it. He shuts his eyes, bridles his senses, and refuses to perceive the world. The world around him therefore ceases to be. There is no flowering or fruition. Shiva's abode is therefore a mountain of ice. Cold, lifeless. While Shiva churned the inner fire of tapa, the gods looked forward to the outer fire of Gyan, which empowered them in their battles against the Asuras. Each time they won, rasa gushed out of earth's every pore. Rivers flowed, plants bloomed, rocks melted to release metal, and mountains cracked to spill out gems. The earth became bountiful, her wealth displayed in all its splendor for the world to see. But while the gods could release and redistribute the earth's treasures, they did not have the power to regenerate them once spent. That power rested with the demons. The Asuras knew how to bring the dead to life. They could rejuvenate the earth and restore its fertility. They could replenish subterranean stores of water and minerals. All thanks to Shukra, lord of the planet Venus, the guru of the Asuras, who possessed the science of renewal known as Sanjeevani Vidya. Shukra obtained the secret lore of the Sanjeevani Vidya from none other than Shiva himself. Secret of regeneration. Mahabharat. The Devas continued to perform yagnas to gain strength. The hymns chanted during the performance of the yagnas empowered them. With this recharged power, the gods were able to slaughter the Asuras and win every combat. The yagnas were always performed to gain advantage for the gods. No one performed Gyan favoring the Asuras. The balance of power was therefore heavily tilted in favor of the gods, and the Asuras needed to find some way of overcoming them. Finally, Kavya Ushanas, guru of the demons, turned to tapasya. By lighting the inner fire of tapas, he hoped to overpower the outer fire favoring the gods. He undertook severe ascetic measures to achieve his aim. He hung himself upside down from the branch of a tree over a raging fire, breathing nothing but smoke for 1,000 years. When these austerities reached their climax, Kavya Ushanas came face to face with Shiva. Shiva opened his mouth and swallowed Kavya Ushanas, trapping him within his body. Kavya Ushanas tried to escape but found that Shiva had closed all his orifices, all except the penile passage. As Kavya Ushanas slipped out of this aperture, he came to possess all the knowledge associated with renewal, regeneration and reproduction. Kavya Ushanas's journey through the body of Shiva made him realize the interdependence of tapa and rasa. Just as Shiva transformed rasa into tapa by withholding it in his body, tapa could be made into rasa by causing it to flow outwards. Shiva's inner fire was thus a vast reservoir of energy into which anyone could tap to restore life on earth. To acknowledge Shiva as his teacher and father, the eternal and inexhaustible source of life-giving energy, Kavya Ushanas took on the title of Shukra, the seed keeper of fertility. With this science of regeneration, Shukra was able to revive Asuras killed in battle. The Asuras, in turn, were able to recreate plant and mineral wealth that the Devas could draw and distribute, but never generate. This is why in art Shiva is always shown surrounded by demonic, Asura-like, frightening beings. In his presence, they are Ganas, minions of God. But while the Asuras knew how to transform Tapa into Rasa, they did not share their wealth with the world. When they were powerful, the earth was barren. The Aryas therefore despised them as niggardly hoarders. By performing Ying they empowered Devas, who released Rasa hoarded by Asuras. Hoarded Rasa nourished no one. Hoarding was therefore a crime. Daksha, patriarch of Aryas, opposed Shiva for withholding his semen. He admired Indra for shedding his semen freely. He even cursed Chandra, the moon god, with the wasting disease because he refused to share his semen with all his wives, thus behaving as a hoarder no different from an Asura. Waxing of the moon. Somanath Sthala Purana. Daksha was the father of many daughters. He gave 27 of his daughters in marriage to Chandra, the moon god, who was renowned for his beauty and virility. Each of Daksha's daughters was a nakshatra, or lunar mansion. Of all the nakshatras, Rohini was the most beautiful and alluring. Chandra preferred the beautiful Rohini to his other wives and found himself seeking her out more than the others. His other wives felt neglected and complained to their father, who threatened Chandra with dire consequences if he did not treat all his wives with equal affection as was expected of any polygamous man. Chandra, however, disregarded Daksha's threat and continued to love the beautiful Rohini to the exclusion of his other wives. Daksha's threat took effect and Chandra was cursed with a degenerating disease. As the days passed, the moon god lost his potency and began to wane. Terrified, he did not know what to do. Finally, he took refuge with the only god who had opposed Daksha, Shiva. He housed himself on Shiva's head. There, he found the power to regenerate himself. His potency returned and he began to wax. With joy and gratitude he addressed Shiva as Chandrasekhara, he who saved the moon by placing him on his head. A sobered Chandra thereafter decided to devote one night to each of his 27 wives. He waxed on the days that he approached Rohini and waned on the days that he moved farther from her. On the new moon night he had no wife by his side. On the day before, when he was just a crescent, the moon celebrated Shivaratri, the night of Shiva, and took refuge in Shiva's locks, safe in the knowledge that he would have the power to regenerate and wax again. The restoration of Chandra made the Devas realize what Shukra had already known, that Shiva's tapa could nourish life too. Just as Shiva drew on the rasa of the outer world to light the inner tapa, the outer world could sustain itself by drawing energy from Shiva. Clearly, Shiva was no mere ascetic god of the Dravidas. He was not merely the teacher of yoga and tapasya. He was much more than an alchemist. He was the embodiment of the Brahman invoked in the Gita. Worship of Shiva was no different from performing Gita. This realization caused Vedic society to abandon ritualism in favor of theism. The fire altars were abandoned and shrines were built where Shiva was adored as Mahadeva, the greatest of gods, God. The Asuras worshipped him because a passage through Shiva's body revealed the science of regeneration to their guru. The Devas worshipped him because he helped the waning moon wax by simply placing Chandra on his head. Karmic cycle. Fire can be spent interacting with the outer world of rasa or retained by withdrawing into the inner world. The former process is called bhoga while the latter is called yoga. The Asuras were not content with being restored to life by their guru. They wanted to defy death and control the flow of rasa. To do this, they began performing tapasya and lighting the inner fire of tapa, just like Shiva. But Shiva performed tapasya to burn the fetters of conditioning and throw light on the true nature of things. His aim was Satchitta Ananda. His goal was Samadhi, liberation from samsara. The aim of the Asuras tapasya, however, was Siddhi, manipulation of samsara by unlocking the mysteries of rasa. The Asuras accumulated tapa, not to burn the fetters of worldly life, but to control the substance of the cosmos in order to hoard wealth and survive any onslaught of the devas. Churn. Devas and Asuras represent the force and counter-force of nature. Devas draw rasa upwards, out of the earth. Asuras withdraw rasa downwards, into the earth. The action of the devas draws the earth's bounty towards man. Hence, they are deemed gods. The hoarding Asuras are rejected as demons. A boon for Tarka. Shiva Purana. Once, an Asura named Tarka was desirous of attaining power to be able to defeat the gods and control the world. He decided to perform tapasya to achieve his goal. He sat still, completely absorbed in his penance, refusing to react to any worldly stimuli, with no thought of time. Such was his concentration that God appeared before him in the form of Brahma. What boon do you seek? Tarka asked Brahma. Tarika's single-minded pursuit was to acquire siddhis and material gains that would enable him to be master of all he desired, rather than use the moment to liberate himself from the cycle of rebirth. Tarka asked Brahma to make him immortal. When Brahma firmly replied that it was not possible since all living organisms must eventually die, Tarka asked for a boon that would make him almost immortal. If I must die, let it be at the hands of a child who can fight battles when he is 6 days old, on the 7th day of his life. Brahma granted him his wish, adding that such a child would only be a son of Shiva. Tarka was satisfied. Empowered by this boon, he went about his mission with zeal. He drove the gods out of the celestial realms and became master of the 3 worlds. The triumph of Tarka led to cosmic chaos. Wealth was regenerated and hoarded, not distributed. It was time for the gods to assert themselves. But the gods did not know how. No being was powerful enough to produce such a hyper-masculine warrior child. According to Tantra, a child is born when the white seed of man mingles with the red seed of woman during the fertile period. The biology of the child conceived depends on the power of the respective seeds. A male child is conceived when the white seed is powerful and a female child is conceived when the red seed is powerful. When both red and white seeds are equally powerful, the child is neither male nor female. Asceticism and continence make a seed powerful, sometimes so powerful that it does not need the support of a red seed or the warmth of a womb. Since Shiva was the greatest tapaswin, who had remained continent for eons, the gods concluded that his seed was the most powerful of all, capable of producing the hyper-masculine warrior child who could kill Tarka. Energized by tapas, Shiva's semen moved upwards. It was time to make Shiva's semen move downwards and produce a child out of it. It was time to make Shiva a father. So they invoked the goddess. She was once Sati who had provoked Shiva into action. Though she had died, they believed they could resurrect her like all things material and make her enchant Shiva again. She was Yoganidra, formless and unobserved when consciousness was withdrawn. She was Yogami, full of forms when consciousness gave her attention. Goddess worship became part of the Hindu mainstream centuries after the nomadic areas settled in the Indian subcontinent. In early Vedic scriptures, there are references to goddesses such as Aditi, the mother of the Devas, and Prithvi, who embodies the earth. But these female deities are reduced to insignificance by their male counterparts such as the thunderous rain god Indra, the effulgent fire god Agni, and the radiant sun god Surya. In later Vedic scriptures, female deities play a more central role. Like the ascetics, the goddesses perhaps made their entry into Hinduism after the Aryan tryst with the Dravidas. That being the primary Vedic ritual, did not demand a permanent shrine suggests that the animal-eating nomads were not as rooted to the soil as the Dravidian communities, who in all likelihood were farmers tuned to the rhythm of fertility. The latter saw the earth as the goddess who nourished living things with milk, demanding nourishment of blood in return. This goddess had two mutually dependent forms: the docile, loving, maternal aspect called Mangala Gauri, and the wild, bloodthirsty, killer aspect called Chandika Kali. The former was given flowers and incense. The latter was offered blood through animal sacrifices. With the mingling and merging of Aryan and Dravidian worldviews, the goddess had been acknowledged by the Aryas as Sati, the daughter of a king performing Daksha and the consort of a Tapasya performing Shiva. Both relationships were fraught with tension. The father sought to control the daughter. The husband preferred to ignore the wife. She was the battleground where the world affirmer and the world rejecter met and clashed. As Sati, the goddess had forced Shiva to feel and respond to worldly stimuli. Then she had died, childless. As the embodiment of all things material, the gods were sure they could make the goddess return once again and make Shiva open his eyes. Because of her transformations, she came to be known as Ch2, one of infinite forms. Since her forms were enchanting and deceptively unchanging, she was called Maya, the embodiment of delusions. She was also Shakti, the energy, whose form was determined by the gaze of the observer. She was Prakriti, nature, the individual's world. She was Saraswati, the medium of enlightenment, as well as Lakshmi, the source of nourishment. Ushas, Ch2, Maya, Shakti, Prakriti, Saraswati and Lakshmi are all titles of the goddess. Brahma creates her by becoming aware of her. This may not be entirely true. For when Vishnu sleeps, the world continues to exist, albeit in a dissolved state as the ocean whose waters serve as Vishnu's bed. Only Vishnu is not aware of this goddess bed. Since Hindu seers were concerned with subjective, not objective, worlds, for them awareness of the goddess was a prerequisite to her existence. For goddess worshippers, the goddess exists always. When Vishnu is asleep and when he is awake. When Vishnu is asleep, when consciousness is not sensitive to life, the goddess exists as Yoganidra, the great slumber. When Vishnu awakens, when consciousness is sensitive to experience, the goddess exists as Yogami, the great delusion that is life. When there is enlightenment, Vishnu experiences the goddess as Yoga Vidya, the wisdom of experience. Brahma, Vishnu, Shiva are all manifestations of God. In Hindu mythology, the term God indicates the divine within, while the term goddess represents the divine without. God creates the goddess by becoming aware of her. The goddess enables God to realize his godhood. Thus, in her, he is truly born. This explains the Vedic verse, out of God was born goddess and out of goddess was born God. In narratives, Saraswati is said to be Brahma's consort, Lakshmi is Vishnu's consort and Shakti is Shiva's consort. Thus God cannot exist without the goddess. In other words, the inner subjective world cannot exist without the outer objective world. Brahma cannot create anything without Saraswati, who is knowledge. Vishnu cannot sustain anything without Lakshmi, who is wealth. Shiva cannot destroy anything without Shakti, who is power. The symbol of man and woman, and their mutual interdependence, helped ancient seers explain with great simplicity complex ideas of interdependence of concepts. It was impossible to explain the concept of subject without the concept of object, just as it was extremely difficult to explain the concept of man without the concept of woman. And so it came to pass that man came to represent subject and woman came to represent object. He was intangible spirit. She was tangible matter. Of course, one may wonder why the male form was associated with the still, serene, permanent soul, and the female form with the ever-changing, restless, permanent matter. Perhaps the seers saw in the regular transformation of the female body, in the menstrual tides, a link with the regular transformations of nature, the waxing and waning of the moon, the rising and ebbing of tides, the change of seasons. This made the female biology, which created life within itself, more suitable to represent ideas of fertility and worldliness, whereas the male biology, which created life outside itself, was more suitable to represent ideas of monasticism and otherworldliness. The goddess took birth as Parvati, the daughter of the mountains. Her father was Himavan, god of the Himalayas, the great snow-clad mountain range that borders India's northern frontier. He was the king of all the mountains. And like all mountains, he represented stability and permanence. Shiva meditated on these mountains. So great was Shiva's tapasya that all the heat was absorbed into his body, making the mountains cold and devoid of life. It was up to the daughter of the mountains to bring life into this barren, desolate landscape. At first, she tried seducing Shiva, making herself beautiful and presenting herself before the ascetic as a nymph. This trick had worked with other ascetics. Whenever the gods had seen an ascetic perform tapasya, they had sent down a nymph to seduce him. The nymphs always succeeded in making ascetics shed seed and stay rooted to earth. Menika's charms. Mahabharat. Sage Vishwamitra was born King Kaushika. One day, marching at the head of his troops, he reached the ashram of the sage Vashishta, where he was warmly received. Vashishta was the owner of a celestial cow called Kamadhenu, the one who fulfills all desires, and was able to extend hospitality and satisfy every request made by the king. Kaushika was overtaken by envy and greed. He wanted to possess the wonderful cow, but the sage refused to part with it. Thereupon, Kaushika used force to try to acquire the cow, but his army and weapons were no match for Vashishta's spiritual powers. The defeated Kaushika decided to undergo penance and obtain supernatural powers. He spent years in meditation, finally gaining the power he sought. His years of penance transformed him, and he decided to give up his kingdom and live the life of an ascetic. As sage Vishwamitra, he churned the fire within and became so powerful that the gods were afraid. Indra, king of the gods, decided to send the nymph Menika to distract Vishwamitra and seduce him. Menika was an apsara, beautiful and voluptuous. She danced before Vishwamitra, flaunting her charms, finally forcing him to open his eyes and submit to her. Nymphs in Hindu mythology are known as apsaras. The word has its roots in apsa or water. They are embodiments of rasa. They make the world go round by drawing energy out of tapa and channeling it towards samsara. Nymphs are thus the water that puts out the fire of tapa. The water nymph is thus in eternal conflict with the fire ascetic. While he seeks to withdraw from the world, she seeks to draw out the ascetic. She is the womb that seeks to milk the seed out of the body so that it can rotate the cycle of life. She is the obstacle to tapasya, the greatest enemy of the tapaswin. Symbolism of fire and water. Fire, water, taparasa, masculine, feminine, inner reality, outer reality, spirit, matter, Shivashakti, hermit, nymph, falluswarm, staff pot, pestle, motif. Indifference is the path that ignites tapa. Desire is the tool to make rasa flow. Desire, proclaims the Rig Veda, transforms the unmanifest idea, asat, into the manifest form, sat. The world becomes manifest and life begins only when the individual desires to know his true self. So says the Upanishad. To know the self, the individual needs to know what the self is not. For without perceiving the other, one cannot distinguish and establish oneself. To perceive the other, one must open his eyes and let energy flow in the direction of samsara. To make Shiva open his eyes and interact with the world, the gods summon Kandarpa, the love god, the lord of sensory arousal. This is how the scriptures describe Kandarpa, a winsome dark god, who rides a parrot, who wields a sugarcane bow whose bowstring is made of bees, who has 5 flowers serving as his 5 arrows with which he arouses the 5 senses. His companions are Gandharvas and Apsaras, who are fairies born of the perfume and nectar of flowers. They dance and sing, serenade and seduce, as he shoots his merry arrows. Prati and Preeti, the goddesses of erotic craving and emotional yearning, are his consorts. They ride minor birds and hold aloft his banner, which carries his symbol, the zodiac Capricorn, known in Sanskrit scriptures as Makra. Every year when the sun enters the house of Makra, it is spring. The time of love and longing, of flirtation and romance, of birds and bees. But Shiva holds him in disdain and looks upon him with a fiery glance. The fiery glance. Shiva Purana. The Asura Tarka, empowered by Brahma's boon, was creating havoc. He unleashed terror in all the 3 worlds. The gods were alarmed. They realized that Tarka was invincible. The only way to annihilate him was to get Shiva to procreate a son. The gods decided that his beloved Sati had to be reborn as the daughter of King Himavat. Thus was born Parvati, with the mission of marrying Shiva and begetting a son to put an end to the menace of Tarka. Time went by and a young, beautiful Parvati went to Shiva's abode and began to tend to him. However, in spite of all her efforts, she was unable to attract his attention. In despair, the gods asked Kandarpa to enchant Shiva, make him open his eyes and shed his seed. Kandarpa's presence filled the air with romance. Shiva's snow-capped mountain transformed into a pleasure garden full of flowers, bees and butterflies. Flowers bloomed to greet Kandarpa. They made offerings of pollen and nectar at his feet. Nymphs danced, while fairies sang, cheering Kandarpa, who raised his sugarcane bow, drew his bowstring of bees and shot 5 arrows at Shiva. The arrows stirred the yogi's senses. He was not amused. He opened his third eye and let loose a fiery missile that set Kandarpa ablaze and reduced him to ashes. Having destroyed the Lord of Sensory Indulgence, the Lord of Sensory Discipline resumed his meditation. Shiva had no interest in the cycle of renewal. He was blissfully immersed in tapasya when Chandra took refuge on his head and when Shukra passed through his body. The benefits that the two deities derived from their contact with Shiva were purely incidental. Shiva remained an indifferent outsider. If anything, Shiva opposed the fertility cycle. To Shiva, the unending transformations of nature brought anticipation and frustration with unfailing regularity. They reminded him of the joy he felt when Sati danced on his lap and the misery he experienced when he held her corpse in his arms. To him, the world was merely a matrix of delusions that took the mind away from the state of Sat-Chitta Ananda. So he severed all association with the material world, shut his eyes, withdrew into cold, dark caves and meditated on sterile snow-clad mountains, warming himself with the inner fire of tapas. When Shiva opened his third eye and destroyed the love god Kandarpa, it was clear to the gods and to the goddess that Shiva was no ordinary ascetic who could be seduced. He had to be forced to abandon his ascetic ways through a display of unshakable resolve and absolute devotion. So the goddess decided to make Shiva open his eyes, not as a nymph, but as a hermit. According to Hindu metaphysics, since all creatures, animate and inanimate, temporal and divine, are linked by karma, it is possible to change the course of life by introducing one's desire into the cosmos. Desire has to be introduced with stubbornness until the cosmos has no choice but to yield and give in to one's wishes. This is Hatha Yoga, or the yoga of unshakable resolve. Unshakable resolve was expressed through acts of austerity and self-mortification. It was not mere meditation or contemplation. Sometimes it involved giving up food, sleep and comforts, and sometimes outright torture, sitting on fire, sleeping on thorns, or standing on one foot with upraised arms. Parvati's actions are different from Shiva's. Shiva's meditation is an expression of indifference to worldly life. Her austerities are an expression of her determination to have her way. He lights the inner fire, one that burns everything around. Parvati uses the accumulated energy to force an event around her. She creates a stimulus to which Shiva has no choice but to respond. It is not a stimulus that enchants Shiva. It is a stimulus that demands his attention. Parvati wins Shiva's heart. Shiva Purana. To help Parvati, the mountain princess, win the heart of Shiva, the gods had enlisted the help of Kandarpa, but Shiva reduced him to ashes by a single glance of the third eye. Parvati, however, continued to visit Shiva's cave every day with a basket of food and flowers. She cleaned the cave and took care of the ascetic, but he remained totally indifferent to her affection. Determined to marry the stubborn hermit, Parvati eventually left her father's house and took to living like an ascetic in the forest. She withdrew into herself and withheld all thought, action, breath and seed. So great was her tapasya that it threatened the foundations of the mountains. In the wake of such determination, Shiva was forced to open his eyes. He tried to dissuade Parvati, informing her that life with a hermit would be nothing like the life she had with her royal father. He suggested she marry a prince or a god, someone young and handsome and virile. But Parvati would not budge. She was adamant. Shiva was forced to acknowledge that he had met his match. He agreed to marry Parvati. Bent on making a householder of this hermit, the mountain princess insisted he marry her in the ritually prescribed manner. In India, women seeking good husbands emulate Parvati. On particular days of the week such as Monday, associated with the moon god and Shiva, they fast in the hope of getting the husband of their choice. This fasting is called vrat or observance, an abbreviated form of Parvati's penance that enables one to get what one desires. A vrat is a personal ritual, not one that is performed by priests. It involves not just ritual acts but also complete focus of the mind and the heart on the desired result. Vrat is considered to be a ritual act through which one can manipulate the workings of the cosmos. It is an internalized gain. The aim is not to change one's view of the world but to change the world itself. Shiva opened his eyes and agreed to be Parvati's groom. But there was a problem. Shiva did not know the rules of social conduct, what was considered appropriate or inappropriate, what was auspicious and what was inauspicious. The hideous groom. Linga Purana. In the sacred scriptures, it has been stated that the groom must come to the bride's house with his family and seek her hand in marriage. Shiva, the ascetic, had no family, so he invited his companions to his wedding. To the horror of the gods, the retinue comprised ghosts, goblins, gnomes, witches, vampires and dwarfs. Shiva himself rode a bull. He smoked hemp and drank poison. His companions, who did not know the ways of the world, bedecked him with ash, skulls, bones, serpents and animal hide. When he arrived at the gates of the Mountain King's palace, the women who had assembled to welcome him ran away in fright. Mena, Parvati's mother, refused to accept this man, who looked like a beggar and resided in crematoriums, as her son-in-law. Parvati pleaded with Shiva, "You promised to marry me. Please take the form that pleases my parents, at least until they have given consent to our marriage." So Shiva let the gods bedeck him as they deemed fit. Shiva was bathed with celestial waters and dressed in silks, flowers, gold and gems. When the gods had finished, he looked more handsome than Kandarpa himself. He was as fair as the full moon. His limbs were as lithe as those of a dancer. All the assembled women fell in love with him. They declared him Sundareshwara, the Lord of Beauty. Even Mena was impressed. Joyously, she let Shiva marry her daughter. In the presence of the gods, in a ceremony presided over by Brahma himself, Shiva and Parvati exchanged garlands to become husband and wife. This is Shiva's second marriage. In both weddings he was the reluctant groom. In the first, he married the daughter of Daksha, the primal priest. In the second, he married the daughter of Himavat, the mountain king. In the first, he annoyed his father-in-law when he did not bow to him. In the second, he scared his father-in-law when he appeared dressed as a beggar and mendicant. In the first, the goddess had merely walked out of her father's house to marry Shiva. In the second, the goddess had insisted that Shiva come to her father's house to claim her. There is a conscious effort by the goddess to bring together the patrons of Gyan and the followers of Tapasya through love and understanding. For both aspired to peace, one by churning the outer fire and the other by churning the inner fire. The goddess finds merit in the path of the priest kings who seek to establish a peaceful society as well as the path of hermits who seek an inner peace. She bridges the gap between the outer way and the inner way. With Bhakti Yoga, the path of devotion and understanding, she unites Karma Yoga, the path of action, and Jnana Yoga, the path of introspection. The heart succeeds in uniting mind with matter. In the southern traditions, Parvati is described as Vishnu's sister. Vishnu is the keeper of cosmic and social order, the upholder of natural and cultural values. He is the champion of the gods, who ensures the rotation of the cycle of life. He knows that this marriage of Shiva with Parvati will result in the birth of children who will ensure that Shiva's power becomes part of the world, not indifferent to it. Their children will kill demons, remove obstacles, and bring material prosperity. In art, he is shown as giving the goddess's hand in marriage to Shiva. In Tantra, Shiva is visualized as a white, ashen corpse with an erect penis. He is so internalized that his body does not sense the outer world, it is like a dead body. His semen flows upwards, lighting the inner fire of inner wisdom, born by deconstructing the outer world. The flames leap up and stir his phallus. The goddess appears in the form of Kali, who is dark, bloodthirsty, naked with unbound hair, sexual and violent simultaneously. She cuts her own head and drinks her own blood, indicating her autonomy. At the same time she sits down to copulate with Shiva, indicating her dependence. By copulating with Shiva she is forcing him to acknowledge the outer world where matter manifests in various forms. She seeks to draw out his energy, his semen. Her womb is the pot of life-giving water. By sitting on Shiva's phallus, she encloses the fire of the inner world with the waters of the outer world. A more abstract representation of the sexual union is the Shivalinga enshrined in Hindu temples. If one takes away the body of the copulating Shiva and Shakti except for the genitals, what remains is an upward-pointing phallic shaft of Shiva who lies on his back surrounded by a leaf-shaped trough, the lips of the goddess's vagina. Thus the devotee stands within the womb of the goddess. The entities around are manifested forms of rasa. Life happens when the goddess tries to draw God into the world, transforming his world-denying fire into her world-sustaining sap. The pot hanging on top of the linga in Hindu temples is yet another representation of the yoni of the goddess. The water hopes to douse the flames of Shiva's fire and transmit its energy into the material world. In geometry, the union is depicted as the union of the downward-pointing triangle, the womb, with the upward-pointing triangle, the phallus. The six-pointed star indicates the union of Shiva and Shakti. It is a geometric depiction of the Shivalinga, with the upward-pointing triangle representing the shaft of the linga and the downward-pointing triangle representing the yoni trough. These geometrical representations of metaphysical ideas are known as yantras. In goddess worship, autonomous forms of the goddess such as Kali are represented by downward-pointing triangles without the upward-pointing triangle. This is reinforced by several such triangles, one within the other. When the goddess is visualized as a mother, her yantra includes both the upward-pointing and downward-pointing triangles, such as in the Shri Yantra. The sexual act was more than just a sexual act to the seers. In its simplest form it was the union of man and woman, an act of fertility. The meanings transcended biology and evolved with the seeker's understanding of the world. The gods wanted a hyper-masculine child to kill Tarka. They wanted a being who was ageless so that even on the seventh day of its life, when it was 6 days old, it was powerful enough to fight the demon. In other words, they wanted an embodiment of tapa that was not bound by the rules of samsara. They wanted the goddess to milk out Shiva's seed but not nurture the seed in her womb. So they charted an elaborate plan to prevent the red seed of the goddess from mingling with the white seed of God. Birth of Skanda. Vamana Purana. Skanda Purana. Skanda. The gods interrupted the love-making of Shiva and Parvati. Embarrassed, Parvati turned away and Shiva's semen spurted out. The fire god Agni caught the semen in his flames but found its radiance too powerful to bear. To cool it down, He gave the seed to Vayu, the wind god, who, having failed in this endeavor, plunged it into the icy waters of the river Ganga. The river water started to boil. Such was the energy contained in Shiva's seed. 6 forest virgins, the Kritikas, wives of the 7 celestial sages, who were bathing in the river, became pregnant with that one seed. Their husbands declared them unchaste. In shame, they cleared their wombs and abandoned the unborn fetuses in Sarvana, the forest of reeds. No sooner did the fetuses touch the ground than the forest of reeds was set ablaze. In the forest fire, the 6 fetuses united to become one child with 6 heads. The Kritikas wanted to kill this child as he embodied their shame. But as soon as they came near him, their breasts started oozing milk. Overcome by maternal affection, the Kritikas nursed this child whom they named Kartike, the son of the Kritikas. The child born of Shiva's seed, that had been milked by Parvati and incubated by Agni, Vayu, Ganga and Sarvana and nursed by the Kritikas, was also named Skanda. When Skanda was 6 days old, on the 7th day of his life, he was strong enough to pick up a lance and lead the gods into battle against Tarka. After a fierce fight, he triumphed over Tarka. By defeating Tarka, Skanda helps the Devas draw out Rasa from beneath the earth's surface. He restores the cycle of Rasa. Thus, through Skanda, Shiva participates in worldly affairs. In art, Skanda is represented by symbols of masculinity such as the lance, the rooster and the peacock. He is associated with the planet Mars. Skanda is popularly worshipped in South India as Murugan, the boy god, and as Kumara, the eternal child. He is Subramaniam, the helpful god, who stands atop mountains and protects mankind. He has 2 consorts, Sena, the daughter of the Devas, and Vali, the daughter of local tribes. According to some, his wives are symbols of his army and his weapons to whom he is married. In North India, he has no consorts. He is a virile warmonger who takes men to battle and makes widows of women. But the goddess is not satisfied with this offspring of Shiva. He had been neither nurtured in her womb nor nursed on her breasts. Though this child of Shiva had helped the world, he did not represent Shiva's direct interest in worldly events. Shiva remained as indifferent as ever. The marriage had been forced on him. Even their love-making, with her on top, seemed one-sided. His semen had spurted out rather unintentionally. While the gods had got their champion, the goddess wanted more from Shiva. She wanted him to truly father a child and through him contribute to the workings of the world. Birth of Ganesha. Shiva Purana. Ganesha. Parvati wanted Shiva to father a child, but he refused. An exasperated Parvati created a child on her own using the turmeric paste she anointed herself with. The child was called Vinayak because he was born without the intervention of a man. Parvati asked her son to guard the entrance to her bath and not let anyone in. Vinayak obeyed, blocking even Shiva's entry, not knowing he was his mother's consort. An otherwise detached Shiva lost his cool, raised his trident, and beheaded the stubborn lad. Parvati was inconsolable in her grief and threatened to transform from Gauri, the life-giving goddess, to Kali, the life-taking goddess, if her son was not resurrected. Shiva therefore ordered his followers, the Ganas, to fetch him the head of the first living being they encountered. They brought back the head of an elephant, which Shiva placed on the severed neck of Parvati's son and restored him to life. By giving him life, Shiva became the boy's father. He acknowledged his fatherhood by naming the lad Ganapati, Lord of the Ganas. Parvati's fury at the death of her child forces Shiva to act. When he resurrects her creation and appoints him as leader of his followers, he consciously becomes father and thus part of the material world. The resurrected Ganapati, with a body created by the goddess and a head given by God, represents the transformation of Shiva, the hermit, into Shiva, the householder. The choice of an elephant's head is interesting. In Hindu symbolism, the elephant represents material abundance. Indra, king of the gods, rides an elephant. Elephants flank Lakshmi, the goddess of wealth and prosperity. Shiva, who rejects material pleasures, is described as Gajantaka, he who flays the elephant and uses its thick skin as his upper garment. By using the elephant's head to resurrect the child of his consort, Shiva in effect demonstrates his participation in the world of Rasa. He uses the power of Tapa to bring to life the child he killed. Ganapati's head represents Tapa. His body represents Rasa. He reconciles God and Goddess. He becomes the doorway through which Shiva enters samsara. Although living with his wife and 2 children, Skanda and Ganapati, Shiva is a reluctant householder. He does not find material life to be meaningful. Though the goddess manages to make him a father, she finds it difficult to make him a true householder. He does not appreciate the meaning of a home. A house for Parvati. Folklore. Parvati once begged Shiva to build her a house. Why do we need a house? Shiva wondered. In summer when it is hot, I sit under the shade of the banyan tree. In winter, when it is cold, I warm myself in the crematorium beside funeral pyres. In the rainy season, I simply fly and sit on the clouds above the rain. Parvati suffers her husband's idiosyncrasies, taking care of her children on her own. She becomes Gauri, the radiant mother, who takes care of her household without any help or support from her husband. In India, women worship Gauri as she represents marital resilience. Infidelity. Folklore. Parvati often fought with Shiva because he never paid attention to his children. He withdrew constantly, either meditating or smoking cannabis. She was left to fend for the family all by herself. Once, tired of her constant nagging, Shiva went to the pine forest. Parvati followed him there, taking the form of a tribal girl. Shiva began to miss Parvati. He pined for her. Suddenly, he realized he was being watched by a tribal girl. She reminded him of Parvati. Overwhelmed by desire, he chased the girl and forced her to make love with him. The girl laughed, then cried, then revealed her true identity and accused Shiva of infidelity. Shiva tried to reason with her, but she was inconsolable. To calm down, Parvati decided to bathe in Lake Mansarovar. When she returned to the banks, she discovered that mice had chewed her blouse. To her delight, a tailor was passing by. He agreed to darn her blouse if she paid him for it. But I am the wife of a penniless hermit, she said. In that case, pay me with an embrace, said the tailor. Parvati agreed. When the blouse was darned, the tailor demanded his payment and Parvati obliged. After they had made love, the tailor burst out laughing. It was none other than Shiva. You are no different from me, he said. I am, she cried. You were unfaithful because of lust. I was unfaithful because of poverty. From time to time, however, the goddess ensures Shiva knows her value as the following narrative shows. Annapurna's kitchen. Kashi Sthala Purana. Once, Shiva said that he did not need a consort. So Parvati walked out of Mount Kailasa. Some time later, Shiva felt hungry. At such times he usually went to Parvati. But this time she was not around. And there was no food in the kitchen. The hunger pangs became unbearable with the passage of time. Shiva could neither meditate nor sit still. Desperate, he wandered through the three worlds in search of food. As the days passed, he realized the value of the goddess, how she sustained the body in the Jiva's quest for self-realization. When he heard that Parvati had set up a kitchen in the city of Kashi, he rushed there with his begging bowl. He apologized and requested her to feed him. She filled his bowl with food and he ate to his heart's content. Shiva declared Parvati to be Annapurna, the goddess of food, and took her back to Mount Kailasa so that she could set up her kitchen on its icy slopes. According to one narrative, Shiva was so pleased with Parvati when she fed him that he embraced her tightly. So tightly that his left half became one with the goddess. This gave rise to the form known as Ardhanarishvara. Bringi Cursed. Tamil temple law. Bringi was a devotee of Shiva, so he wanted to circumambulate the Lord but not his consort. We are two halves of one, said Parvati, who sat on Shiva's left lap and prevented Bringi from going around Shiva alone. Bringi took the form of a flea and tried to fly between their heads. Parvati fused her body with that of Shiva so that she became Shiva's left half. Bringi then took the form of a worm and tried to bob between the two halves of Shiva's body. Angered by his refusal to acknowledge her, Parvati cursed Bringi. You shall lose all those parts of the body that come from a woman, she shouted. Instantly, his body was stripped of flesh and blood. He was left with nothing but bones and nerves. Bringi collapsed on the floor and realized he could not even stand. He understood the value of the goddess. To remind him and others like him that Shiva was incomplete without his consort, Parvati refused to restore his body to its original state. Instead, Shiva gave Bringi a third leg so that he could stand like a tripod. Shiva's purity tempered with Shakti's pragmatism balances the world order. He is the truth, free of restrictive definitions. She is the reality, where space and time give the world name and form, and determine what is spiritual and what is material, what is appropriate and what is inappropriate. She takes his seed into her womb and transforms the mystery of the divine into tangible manifestations of wealth and wisdom, brains and brawn. The goddess sits beside Shiva and tempers his innocent ways so that it helps society. She introduces divisions and standards into his vision. She makes him appreciate the divide between the seer and the scenery, the subject and the object. When his innocence lands him in trouble, she works hard to rectify the damage.